Hello guys, welcome back. This is the second 1 hour of session 1. My name is Martin Jones and this is P2 Corporate Reporting here at Interactive. So P2 Corporate Reporting with me, Martin Jones. And I have a question that popped up during the very brief break where I grabbed my water. You can probably just about see that in shot there. Got a very cute plastic cup there, a nice big cup with lots of water in it. And it was asking, what happens if, and I'm not going to read the rest because it is not relevant, because the answer to your question, Humayun, is in your homework question as it happens. I was planning on showing you the homework question right at the end of the session, but as it's come up, the homework question has been I've been directed to the homework question. Gosh, I seem to be stuttering today. I don't know why. I've been directed to the homework question early. I will direct you to the homework question. The homework question is this absolute babe called Hebrides. Looks a bit like Hebrides, doesn't it? But it is an absolute babe of a question. I'll just bring my pen across. Maybe I have to do a little bit of that. There we go. And then I'll just scroll down. If I just scroll down slowly over my shoulder, I should be looking up really, shouldn't I? There you go. Do you recognise it? It basically is parent, subsidiary, associate. It's pedal, saddle, handlebar again, isn't it? But it's kind of puffed up a little bit. And it's a fantastic question with lots and lots of little baby things going on. It's just basically more, it's just bigger. So your homework really is to do pedal, saddle, handlebar, pedal, saddle, handlebar, pedal, saddle, handlebar again 3 times until you got the question, you can remember the numbers, and then you have a go at Hebrides and you make sure you do that until you're sorted. And the question that you have, Hunyman, is answered by this question. The question that you have is answered by this question. I'll just read it now. Sir, what if we were issuing shares during the year? Would the value at the year end change the growth? For example, blah, de, blah, you know. So, yeah, the question is, first of all, you're getting very mixed up between we and here. I just want to make sure you've got a few ideas here. So when you use the word we, you're the parent, right? You're the parent. So we are the parent. We're not the sub. The sub is a separate entity. It's part of our group, but we are the parent, right? So the parent can issue shares, and the parent does issue shares in this question. Hebrides. It doesn't happen that often actually, but it did happen a couple of years ago. So parent issuing shares does happen very, very occasionally. What's that? Once in 10 years. That's not very often, is it? But it did happen. It happens in Hebrides and it happens in the fabulous question Cutchin that we'll be doing on the revision course. So the parent might issue shares, but the sub will never, ever, ever issue shares. Because it's the rule, right? Yeah. So the sub will never issue shares. So the sub will never have a change of assets because it's issued shares, because it'll never issue shares. The sub will never have a change of net assets because of a share issue, because the sub will never have a share issue. Just to say it one more time. The sub net assets will never change because of a sub share issue, because the sub won't issue shares. Okay. But the parent might issue shares, you never know. And if there's a share issue in the question, then it'll be addressed by the wonderful homework question, which is Hebrides. But before you have a go at Hebrides, what I'd like you to do is to do pedal, saddle, handlebar 3 times until you know the numbers. It is absolutely guaranteed that pedal, saddle, handlebar is coming up in the exam. It is guaranteed marks. The question will be more advanced than that, of course, but P2 is all about having rock solid basics. And you are absolutely guaranteed to get marks from pedal, saddle, handlebar, so just get doing it now. All right? So your homework is pedal, saddle, handlebar, do it one more time, and then do the question Hebrides. That's your homework. All right? Back to today, back to now, you can see that we've just finished the retained earnings and the NCI, and in fact moved them onto the balance sheet and made the balance sheet balance. And it feels like the question's finished, doesn't it? But actually, of course, we haven't done the P&L report. Why not? I'm going to have a fresh new, brand new page. I can. So I will. And here's another thing that's very cultural. We basically do what we do because that's what we do, rather than because it's really necessarily the most sensible thing to do. But what we do when we get to the group P&L is we start whacking out columns. Because that's the culture. What we do when we get to the P&L is we start whacking out columns, because that's the culture. Columns. Hang on, what's this thing here? Adj. That doesn't look like associate. Where's the associate gone? What's adj? Well, adj refers to adjustments, and all real examination questions have adjustments where the parent sells to the subsidiary or the subsidiary sells to the parent. And that doesn't happen in this question because it's a basic question, but it will be happening in the exam questions that we do together on revision. And therefore you will be using that column when you get to the exam questions, but just at the moment, just today, we're not. So what's happened to the associate? Well, I'll show you in a minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to communicate control. Control of the revenue. So we had absolute control of our own revenue and the subsidiary revenue, and we just add across. So I better go back to the appropriate question. Can I do it that way? I can, just about. Oh, that was a good shot. Nice. So we have control, control, and no control. So 500, 400, 0. Giving us 900 in total. And so on, we just work our way down the P&L on that basis. Just let me highlight the appropriate numbers. All the way down. So operating costs 200, 210. Now, on the balance sheet we add across, but not down. We did actually add down because we wanted to balance our balance sheet. But there's no point at all in adding down on the P&L because not only are there no marks for adding down, but it doesn't even balance anyway. So we really aren't going to add down. And there are no marks for any of the profit figures. So the operating profit will be abbreviated. OP, what does that stand for? Operating profit! Where's the associate? What I want you to do is when you get to the operating profit, I want you to go slightly insane, because waiting for you just below the operating profit is 2 easy marks, probably the 2 easiest marks in the entire exam. In order to get the associate marks, all you do is you go across to the associate, pick up the tax figure, and then the figure just below, the profit after tax. Pick up the 140, profit after tax. The PAT. Multiply it by the appropriate percentage, 30%, and whack that in, so that's 42. And that's worth 2 marks. And really easy to get right, but it seems really easy to forget as well. So every time you get to operating profit, where's the associate? Go slightly insane, it's operating profit, start looking around for an associate. Okay. Now this is what's called a parent associate. So The parent is invested in the sub, but the parent is invested in the associate. It is actually possible. It's been examined once where parent invested in the sub and the sub invested in the associate. So the sub invested in the associate. It's very unlikely to be examined again, I think, but you never know, it might be. And if it happens, it's not difficult. All you do is just move the number across like that. So that's what you do. So you just move the number across if you happen to have what's called a sub-associate. Parent buys the sub and the sub buys the associate. If that happens, you move the number across. Continuing on. Interest. Uh, 50 and 20. $70. So what's that now? So that's profit before tax, PBT. We abbreviate that, there's no marks for it. Then the tax. So the retained profit brought forward. There's the tax, 80, 60. So that's 80 and 60. Gives us 140. And that's the end of the P&L. Done that right? Yes. That's the end of the P&L. That's the PAT. But then the P&L comes back to life again when we split the PAT between our ownership and the NCI ownership. It's who sits between PAT and PAM. So it works like this. Can I show you? It goes PAM, non-controlling interest, and PAT. There are no marks for the PAT, and there are no marks for the PAM, but there is one mark for the NCI, and the NCI works like this. What you do is you add down for the pink fella here, pink PAT rather cutely. You go 400 minus 210, gives you 190, minus 20, minus 60 gives you 110. And then you multiply that, you multiply that, what happened there? There we go. You multiply that 110 by 20% for the NCI to give you, to give you 22. Hopefully you picked up that slight mistake I made there. I didn't quite line up my lines there. Let's do that again. So you add down to get the 110. You multiply by 20% and that gives you 22. And that 22 is the NCI and gives you 1 mark. Now in the examination there's always 2 marks because there's always 2 subsidiaries. So you add down, multiply by the percentage, and you add down and multiply by the percentage. 1 mark each gives you 22. Now that 22 there goes in there and you just whack it in. And now I guess we need to describe these abbreviations, to unbundle these abbreviations. Well, PAT is profit after tax. And there's no marks for it, so always abbreviate. But PAM I don't know if you will have heard of this before. Maybe you have. But PAM is a bit of a mouthful. It's profit attributable to parent members. Profit attributable to parent members. And in order to communicate the idea, the logic that's happening here, I find it useful to use the German flag. I sometimes get the German flag the wrong way up. I don't want to offend any Germans here, so I better check which way up the German flag is. Just give me a second, I'll check on Google. So, German flag. There you go. So black on the top, I didn't know that. So there we go. So it's going to be black, red, orange. Red, yellow actually. Yellowy orange, gold. So the profit after tax, where's that now? The profit after tax, there is the yellow. So the profit after tax is the total profit after tax of the group. So what we're saying to shareholders, gosh, I wish I could actually point this out to you. Can I just try that line there? Let's see if I can do that with my fingers. That'd be really cute. So what we're saying to shareholders is this is the total profit. This is what belongs to the other guys, and this is yours. Or just my hand just disappears, doesn't it? Just get cut off. So the yellow is the total profit. That belongs to the other guys. And that bit there, that bit at the top, that grey bit, that's yours. So yellow is the total. This belongs to the other guys and the rest is yours. The total profit is the yellow, which is split between us and them. Our bit is the grey and their bit is the red. That's what that's doing. All right, that's that section at the bottom. So that's the NCI section. And that's it. You finished? P&L's less frequent than balance sheets, but they do come up, and that's how P&L is done. So you add across, add across. There really isn't much difference. So perhaps saying this aloud now, when you have a balance sheet question, you go net assets, goodwill, balance sheet. And when you have a P&L question, you go net assets, goodwill, P&L. What you do on the P&L, you add across. What you do on the balance sheet, you add across. So the process is exactly the same depending on which one you've got. All right. Are there any questions before we move on? Great. All right. Me neither. Actually, I lied to you. When I say move on, I mean stay still. Because there's something in this question that I have not explored yet. And the thing that I have not explored yet is called goodwill policies. And we're going to look at goodwill policies. We're going to look at goodwill policies right here. So I'm going to rule off and then have goodwill policies. You see, there is a choice as regards the measurement of goodwill. The choice is not actually yours. The choice belongs to the examiner, and he can choose between two. The two choices are between one, what is called full goodwill, and two, what is called partial goodwill. In full goodwill, NCI is measured at fair value. And in fact, we've done this already, so we can just say see above. So let's go and see above. What we did above was calculate goodwill. There's a lot of colour in there now, isn't there? Calculate goodwill by copying this figure here. And that process of copying that figure there of 60 is called full goodwill. And copying is pretty easy. It's the easiest. Full goodwill is the most frequently examined and also the easiest. But the other one's not particularly difficult. So I think you'll be quite comfortable with it. The other one is called partial goodwill. And NCI is measured at proportion of net assets. And for this, we are going to see below. Just going to give myself a little bit more space. So for this, we're going to see below. So let's have a go at goodwill again. With all our nice abbreviations that you're getting used to. So it's the same subsidiary. We're just doing exactly the same question, but we're now trying out the partial goodwill to see what difference it makes to the goodwill. Remember, the goodwill was 70 before. Now we're going to see what happens when we do the partial policy. So the ownership split was 80-20, and that doesn't change. The fair value of consideration was a matter of fact and was taken from the balance sheet. It was a figure of 260. We just took it straight from the balance sheet. The net assets we worked out ourselves. Do you remember the net assets? That was this figure of 250. We worked that out ourselves. That hasn't changed. In fact, the only thing that changes is the NCI. The 260 is the same as before. The 250 is the same as before. But what changes is this blue fella here. This does indeed change. And the way that it changes is like this. You bring those two babies together and get a smaller figure for NCI. You get 50, of course. Because NCI is smaller, goodwill is smaller, hence its name. So that's partial goodwill. Now, I'll just talk very briefly about the politics of this. There are two goodwill policies. There's full and partial. And the examiner is very keen on the full policy. Everyone is, to be honest with you. And therefore, 9 times out of 10, you'll be having the full policy. You probably won't have the partial policy. But if you do have the partial policy, that's how it's done. So it's not up to you. You don't get to choose. He will either tell you that you've got the full policy or the partial policy, and you either copy the NCI or you work it out in the way that you can see over my shoulder. So it really is the end of that question now. That question is called pedal, saddle, handlebar. Work it again and again and again until it becomes easy. Okay? So that's pedal, saddle, handlebar finished, but it isn't actually goodwill finished. The next thing within goodwill is what's called goodwill impairment. And you might have seen me just briefly looking at that in the notes. It's the next thing coming up. It's the final thing coming up for this afternoon. So the next thing coming up is the final thing coming up for this afternoon. So, moving on. Here's goodwill impairment. What we're going to do is going to have a go at goodwill impairment, have a go at the question, and then I'll see you on Thursday. Now, on Thursday, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this rocket science, basically, changes in ownership. The main thing that we will be doing together in the second session are these 4 pop stars, Lady Gaga, Adamant, and Iggy Pop and Busta Rhymes, Iggy Pop and Busta Rhymes. So those 4 questions will be the main thrust of what we do together next time that we are together. So changes in ownership is the main thing that we'll be doing together when we meet next time. In fact, actually, next time that we meet, we're going to be doing changes in ownership and complex groups. But in spite of its name, complex groups really isn't that complex. The thing that's really going to take our time next time we're together is this subject here of changes in ownership. So next time we meet, we will continue Chapter 1 with changes in ownership. Continuing Chapter 1 now, we're going to have a look at goodwill impairment. You might have heard of this word impairment. An impairment happens when there's a fall in value of an asset. An asset gets into trouble and it has this thing called an impairment. So remember the idea that goodwill is essentially the customer base. So if the customer's loyalty is impinged, maybe because you poisoned one of the customers or something like that, then there would be a fall in value of goodwill, and the fancy name for this fall in value of goodwill is called impairment. That's an interesting question, Punit. Punit asked, do you occasionally get questions where you've got two subsidiaries and one is full and one is partial? That has happened once. Goodwill impairment. So some group questions require students to conduct an impairment review on the subsidiaries at the year end. This results in a goodwill impairment. An impairment occurs when the recoverable value of an asset falls below the carrying value. Now, recoverable value is literal. It's the value you're going to recover from an asset. And there are two things you can do with an asset. Two things I can do with this iPhone. I can either sell it or I can continue to use it. I think I can either use it or I can sell it. Now, value in use is rather nicely called value in use. But annoyingly, value at sale is this alphabet soup, fair value less costs to sell. So we take the higher of value in use and fair value less cost to sell. And that is the formula that we will be applying to the question fake and stock. It sounds like a techie subject, doesn't it? And it is exactly that. It basically just requires some numbers to be bashed, so let's bash them. So the question's fake and stock. Good luck, have fun. So the question is fake and stock. Let's have a look. A parent, fake and stock, bought 100% of the equity of a sub at the year start for 900. Share capital was 100 and retained earnings were 400 and retained profits for the year were 200. Goodwill has an infinite life, and an impairment review of the sub at the first year end revealed a value in use of one figure and a fair value less cost to sell, or net realizable value of another figure of 350. Okay, off we go. So we're going to measure the share capital at the measurement points and the retained earnings at the measurement points. Share capital doesn't change. A parent, fake and stock, bought 100% of the equity of a sub at the year start for 900. Share capital was 100. And of course doesn't change. But retained earnings do change. Retained earnings were 400 and are now 600 because of the retained profits of 200 during the year. And there's no need to show working for that. No need to show an arrow unless you want to. And that gives us 500, 700, and a growth of 200, of course. Then we measure goodwill. So this one is a 100% subsidiary, so a 0% NCI. So the NCI is of course 0. Back to the question for the fair value of consideration. The fair value of consideration is a figure of 900. And the net assets, we slot them in as appropriate, giving us 500 there. And therefore a figure of 600. Oops! And I've been a bit of a naughty boy because, as you can see, I've underlined that 600 there, whereas I know actually there is going to be an impairment. Easy for me to remove that because I've got a fancy board rubber. Now, the way that you do an impairment in a subsidiary is you have a separate section for this subsidiary impairment. And you compare the carrying value of the subsidiary to the recoverable value of the subsidiary. Now, a subsidiary is a business and it's made up of people and things. So you carry goodwill and net assets. Now, of course, net assets change from day to day. Every time the entity makes a profit, it grows slightly, the entity grows slightly. But goodwill stays flat. So that goodwill that was 600 at the year start is still 600 at the year end when there's an impairment review. But the impairment review is at the year end. So we need the net assets at the year end, which is this 700 here. Okay, so that's 700. And that gives us 1100. And as we'll find out, that 1100 is above the recoverable value. The recoverable value is the higher of blah and blah. And it's rather cute in this question. They happen to be stacked on top of each other. 780, 350. The higher is clearly 780. But even though that 780 is higher than the 350, it's lower than the 1100. So 320. So that is the impairment in the CGU. But when a business gets into trouble, who leaves first? Is it people or things? People leave first. The customers leave first. So we eat into the goodwill and we get 280. Why do these figures seem unfamiliar? Oh, oops-a-daisy. What have I done here? Ah, I can see what I've done. Are you still there, guys? Can you see I've made an arithmetic error? But I've made it twice, fortunately, because I'm so familiar with the numbers. Can you see what error I've made? Tell me my mistake. Yeah, well done. You were sitting there quietly going, what's Martin doing? I might have been a bit distracting. So we'll go back over the ideas. The goodwill was 400. Do you know what? How many marks would you lose if you lost that? You'd lose 1. You'd lose 1. So the number of marks for a simple goodwill is 2 marks. And we'd end up with 1 of those. But we'd end up with full marks for the goodwill impairment. The goodwill impairment is a further 2 marks. The whole thing, this figure of 80 it is, isn't it? This figure of 80 is actually 4 marks. And even though we got completely the wrong figure, which is 280, we still end up with 3 out of 4. Anyway, I'll correct it now. Just thought I'd talk about the politics of marking there. So that figure's 400. And that figure of 400 flat-lined for a year, so it didn't do anything for a year. So at the year end, it's still 400. But you can see I made the same mistake twice. And compensated. 400 plus 700 gives 1100. So I ended up getting the right figure at the end there. So 1100 compared to 780. The recoverable value is lower. So the impairment is 320. I got that right. So 320 of 400 gives us 80. And that figure of 80 is worth, as just mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4. But actually the way that the 80 is worth 4 is 2 for the basic goodwill and 2 more for the impairment. Now, if you get the principle of the impairment right, but you've got the figures wrong because you've brought your own figure forward, which is wrong, you still get full marks for the later bit. So in the context of my earlier mistake, I would lose a mark on the goodwill, but I would retain my other 3 marks in full. I'd retain in particular the 2 marks on the impairment in full. I'd retain those 2 marks. All right. So my earlier mistake would have got me 3 out of 4, which is not bad, is it? So it's great. This rule whereby the markers punish you just once for a mistake is called the own figure rule. But you can see that this baby question is just a baby question, isn't it? We need a proper question to really learn how this fella works. And the proper question that we have is the next question. But the next question is in fact so proper, it's got some new stuff in it, some more advanced techniques. Here we go. So here are other group techniques. Fair value adjustments. When you buy a subsidiary, the subsidiary's obviously got a balance sheet, and that balance sheet includes property. Let's go straight to it. That balance sheet includes property, and that property was acquired by the subsidiary many years ago and has been depreciated since. So actually the book value of the property is going down, but the fair value of the property is going up. So you end up with this gap opening up between the true fair value and the book value. And this gap is plugged by this thing called a fair value adjustment, always known as an FVA. And the PUP is completely different, but it's also similar in the sense that it's a basic group technique. So maybe you buy, as a parent, you buy a subsidiary that is a supplier, and this subsidiary continues to supply you. So the parent buys, the parent subsidiary, the subsidiary continues to supply the parent. Now, of course, what you do is you tell the subsidiary to continue to trade in the way that it did before. You bought it merely to stabilize the trade. So the subsidiary is going to continue to make a profit. And from the subsidiary point of view, this profit is real. But from the group perspective, this profit is unreal. And, it's overdone here because it's called unrealized profit. But what it means is unreal profit. So the provision for unrealized profit is an adjustment for unreal profit. And it's perfectly reasonable, when profits are not real, you need to pull them out because they're not real. So this question has got more going on than just the impairment of goodwill. It has got impairment of goodwill, but it's also got an FVA and a PUP, a provision for unrealized profit, and a fair value adjustment as well. And when I say this question, I mean this question, terror. Let's have a go at terror. And then we're finished for the afternoon. Here we go. Terror. A parent, Terror, buys 70% of a sub for 800 at the year start, when the share capital is 50, retained earnings are 350, and the fair value adjustment of 100 is required on machines with a life of 5 years. The fair value of the non-controlling interest is 317. During the year, the sub made profits retained of 50, and the sub sold goods valued at 12 to the parent with a margin at 25%. 1/3 of which is still in inventory in the parent. Goodwill has an infinite life, and a year-end review reveals a value in use of 360. And a fair value less cost to sell of 666, the number of the beast. And of course, it is the group's policy to value the NCI at fair value. And speaking of NCI, you can guess that my focus will be on goodwill But as you can see, the question is asking for NCI. So please remind me to do NCI if you can see that I'm about to forget. Let's do both. Let's do goodwill and NCI. Off we go. Question terror. So question terror. I'll start a fresh new brand new page. Don't want to be straddling the page, that would be awkward. You can see there's a bunch of abbreviations now working as a pack. So let's get this information from the question. Share capital, first of all. So back up there again. When the share capital is 50. So the share capital is 50. And doesn't change, of course. Retained earnings, of course, they do change. The retained earnings were 350, and then we retained, or they retained, a further 50. 350 plus add an extra 50 gives 400. Then back to the question again, we've got an FVA. The FVA was 100 and is on machines with a life of 5 years. And of course 100 divided by 5 gives us 20 per annum. This is an acquisition at the year start, as usual, and therefore the number of annums that have flowed since this acquisition is 1. Therefore, one block of 20 will have been knocked off the 100. One block of 20 off the 100 leaves us with 80. So it's 100 minus 20 for the depreciation leaves us with 80. And we were talking about marks here, weren't we? That little calculation there, the 80 basically is worth 1 mark. And there are no marks at all for any working, so you can do it in your head. Same with the pup, actually. There is 1 mark for the pup. And I have a feeling the pup is 1 as well, actually. And in order to score the 1 mark, all you have to do is multiply the 3 figures together in your head. So the subsold goods valued at 12, with a margin of 25%, 1/3 of which is still in inventory in the parent. So 25% of 12 is 3, 1/3 of 3 is 1, and there is 1 mark for the 1. And there is absolutely no need to show any working at all. However, if you do want to show a little working, something like this. 12 multiplied by 25% multiplied by 1/3 still in stock. However, if this is the first time that you've seen PUP, you might be a little unfamiliar with it. So the parent subsidiary, the subsidiary is actually sold to the parent, and the subsidiary has made a profit when it made that sale. Now, the easiest way to communicate the amount of profit that's hidden in the sale is just to communicate the amount of profit. But it's just not the culture. It's again, so much of this is to do with culture. Instead of being told the amount of profit on the sale, we're told what the sale is and how much of that is profit. It's just the culture. So the original fake profit that the subsidiary recorded was 3. But that fake profit was the amount of fake profit that was fake at the point of the sale. And we're not measuring the balance sheet at the point of the sale. Of course, we're measuring the balance sheets at the year end. Now, the amount of stock that's still in stock in the group is 1/3. So that means 1/3 of the original profit of 3 is still fake now. And we need to pull it out. Let me show you why the sign is as it is. Can you see this figure of 400? The sub is telling us that it's made a profit of 400. But of that 400, we know that 1 is not real. Therefore, the amount of real profit that it's made is 399. And perhaps it would be more technically correct to change the 400 to 399. But that's just not the culture. The culture is whacking in this thing called a pub. So the subsidiary is sold to the parent. We work out the amount of unrealized profit at the point of the transaction. Then we identify how much of that is still unrealized. And then we take that unrealized profit out of the 400 to make sure we only have real profit in the group. So the transfer price was 12. 25% of that is profit. That profit is fake. The profit was 3. But of that 3, 2/3 have become realised, and the other 1/3, oh, excuse me, and the other 1/3 is still remaining. So the other 1/3 is still remaining, and that 1/3 fake profit needs to come out. So we deduct it from the 400 in the way that you see there highlighted in pink, and then we add down. So that's 400, 500. And 450, 530, 529. So the growth is 29, and there is no marks for split growth, so we don't do any of that. What we do is goodwill, as before. What was the ownership split in this one? I forget now. 70%. And 30%. So the 500, we'd whack it in. Parent buys 70% of a sub for 800, so that's the fair value consideration. 800. And the 30% that was given, wasn't it? That was 317. Should be highlighting these two for you, really. So that's 800 and 317. So 800 and 317. So 617 was the goodwill at the year start. And that 617 flatlined for 12 months. That was 617 in the middle of the year, and it was actually 617 yesterday as well. But today, at the year end, it suffers an impairment, which we do in a separate impairment working, where we compare the carrying value to the recoverable value. I think I was a bit naughty. I didn't write the word higher earlier. I did say it, but I don't think I actually wrote it. So we'll do this the opposite way around this time, just to show you it doesn't matter. So the recoverable value is the higher of those two numbers, the higher of those two numbers, 360 and 666. And it is 666, the number of the beast. That is the recoverable value. And the carrying value is, the sum of the people and the things. The goodwill and the net assets at the year end. The 617 has flatlined. but the net assets has gone up to 529. There you go, 529. Ooh. It's gone up to 529. Oh my goodness. And have I got a calculator? Oh, I tell you what, I have got a calculator. I'm just going to nip over there and just grab it. Oh, excuse me, I'm aching. I've got a calculator on my iPhone, of course. Everyone has, don't they? I've got a calculator on my phone, of course. But I prefer my trusty old Casio. But it looks like I don't need it. Punnet's there before me. So just whack that in there for next time. So that was 1146. Thank you, Punnet. And therefore 0, 6 from 4 gives 8. Take away, so it's 380. Oh gosh, mate. 8 has not come out very well at all. 8. 380. Have I done that right? Yeah, I think I've done that right. And that is the impairment. And when a business gets into trouble, who leaves first? Is it the bricks and mortar? Is it the tills? Is it the stock? Or is it the people, the customers? It's the people. It's the customers. So that impairment is not just an impairment in the CGU. It's not just an impairment in the cash generating unit. It is also an impairment in the customer loyalty, otherwise known as goodwill. Still not happy with that. Just let me do that again. There we go. Which leaves us with 7, 2, no 3. Gosh, I am tired today. I don't know why I'm quite so tired. 237. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Oh my word. And presumably, have I got that wrong as well? No, I've got that right, as in I got it wrong. So it's 480. Thank you, guys. I think I need my coffee tonight, don't I? There's no doubt about it. I should have used my calculator. That was the problem, wasn't it? So 480. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, silly me. So 480 means 500. Is that 137 then? I managed to get that one right. So there we go. And the number of marks that we've accumulated so far is actually 6. We've got 2 in the bag already, and then we got 1, 2, 3, 4 more for that. Those 4 marks are in fact, same as before, 2 marks and 2 marks, and that adds to the earlier 2 marks on the net assets. But there's 8 marks for this examination standard question, and that's because there is NCI for me to do at the end. Here's the NCI, and I will end with the NCI. Now the first thing we do with NCI is a roll forward. So acquisition plus subgrowth. Same as before, so I'll show you the game with that. Where is it now? Oh, here we go. Almost went shooting off into the distance there. So it's, oh gosh, no, that's not what I mean to do. This is what I mean to do. It's 317 plus 30% of 29. So 317 plus 30% of 29. So 317 plus 30% of 29, which is 8.7. And then rather cutely, the NCI ends with the 2 I's. The 2 I's are the impairment and the indirect adjustment. Now, of course, naturally, your attention will have flipped to this, indirect adjustment. So I'll follow you there for a second. Next time we're together, we're going to do changes in ownership first. But at the end of the session, next time that we're together, we're going to do this thing called complex groups. And in complex groups, we end up with what's called an indirect ownership. So we own the sub, and then the sub owns the sub-sub. So you get this complex group structure, vertical group structure. Parent buys sub, then sub buys sub-sub. And we do have ownership in the sub-sub, but through the mid-sub. And that kind of ownership is called indirect ownership. And it affects the NCI. So we will see it in chapter 2. I'm cheating, of course. I've done these questions before, so I even know which question it's in. It's in question called D. And of course is not applicable to what we're doing now. What is applicable to what we're doing now is we've just knocked 480 off the top of the balance sheet. If you knock 480 off the top of the balance sheet, you need to knock 480 off the bottom of the balance sheet to keep the balance sheet balanced. So who is going to take a hit for this 480? Well, it's going to be us and them. We're going to take 70%. We're going to take 70%, and they're going to take the other 30% hit. So 150 minus 6, 144. And that there is another 2 marks, giving you 8 marks. And that would be 8 of the 35 marks of numbers for question 1. And it doesn't look too bad, does it, when it's in isolation? But I tell you what, when everything gets mixed together, even this starts to look difficult. Give me a shout when you got the number. It's probably safest if I get you to do the number. You need to deduct the 144. The impairment, of course, makes the NCI go down. They suffer when their customers' loyalty goes down. Everyone suffers when the customers leave. But we take 70% of the suffering, and they take the other 30% of the suffering. So you need to deduct. That's it. Well done. 181.7. I say that's it because I recognise the number. It seems familiar to me. And speaking of that's it, that is actually it from me. So well done, guys. Well done, guys. You've finished the session with me today. Your homework every session will be essentially the same, which is to redo what we've done together. But your second component of homework for this week will be the question Hebrides. And in fact, that was on the slide that we flicked up earlier. You probably don't remember it because we weren't really looking at that component of the slide. But if I just flick this slide up again, of course, you do recognise the slide, don't you? There we go. We've done the basics of basic groups, including parent, subsidiary and associate, and also goodwill impairment. And that's dealt with in the question Hebrides. Lovely question, Hebrides. So don't do Hebrides straight off. First of all, repeat pedal, saddle, handlebar, repeat it again, then repeat question terror, then repeat it again, and then have a go at question Hebrides. So your homework question for this weekend, I guess, is question Hebrides. Okay, so we're finished for today. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Have a successful Wednesday, and I'll see you on Thursday.